Is XRP in the process of replacing Swift? We are going to give a full and comprehensive breakdown showing the relationship of not only Ripple, but also the XRP Ledger, how they've been building connections all around the world, slowly onboarding clients into the Ledger product, as well as leaving the banks with no choice but to modernize. XRP could take up 14% of Swift in the next 5 years, according to Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse. And now the breaking news from today, we have the Swift CIO going out of his way to criticize not only Ripple, but the XRP Ledger on LinkedIn. We're going to read those statements for our listeners and show them how XRP is a threat to the modern banking system. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Good Evening Crypto, your favorite crypto news related channel. If you enjoy this content, smash that like button and subscribe, as you're going to get an update every single day, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to start off today's episode with the very strong statements out of Swift CIO that were just reported last night. Now, Johnny, what's so interesting about these statements is that nobody asked him a specific question. He went out of his way to make these comments on LinkedIn. So it started off with this person commenting, Ripple's XRP stands alone as a blockchain that's been battle hardened by nearly 5 years of intense regulatory scrutiny, proving its resilience like no other asset. Over a decade, Ripple has been vocal about prioritizing compliance, trust, interoperability, and working hand in hand with global regulators to meet the stringent standards that are driving innovation in cross-border payments. Well, Tom, the CIO out of Swift Settlements, commented, surviving lawsuits is not resilience. Neutral shared governance is. Institutions don't want to live on the competitors' rails, and compliance isn't about one company convincing regulators that it should be allowed to operate. It's about an entire industry agreeing on shared standards that no single balance sheet controls. Now, it's very interesting because you have Swift, a centralized entity, criticizing Ripple, a less centralized entity, and the XRP Ledger, a decentralized entity. Make no mistake about it, the XRP Ledger is decentralized, but he continues with these unwarranted responses. I get why some people see XRP as a neutral bridge, but the harder question is whether the banks will ever be comfortable outsourcing settlement finality to a token that isn't a deposit. It isn't regulated money, and it doesn't sit on their balance sheet. Liquidity is one thing, but legal enforceability is another. The second piece is economics. If tokenized assets and regulated stablecoins scale, why would banks pay a toll to an external asset when they can settle directly in instruments they already control and trust? And we're going to address each one of these concerns, but this was his final point here. My point is less about whether a network is centralized or decentralized, but it's more about control and the alignment with how institutions manage risk. Even if a rail is neutral in design, banks are reluctant to anchor core settlement flows on an asset that sits outside of their balance sheet. That's why Ripple's US dollar stablecoin is interesting, because it looks closer to what banks recognize as safe and pegged to the US dollar. Also, we will see if banks would run size on Ripple's coin. They may only settle money they already issue and control, which is why tokenized deposits will always sit more naturally at the center of institutional settlement. So long story short, Johnny, what do we know for sure? Ripple isn't working with Swift. Ripple is competing with Swift. So when I read statements like this, because we've heard it from Ripple leadership, and this is Chris Larson's statements in regards to this, Ripple is working on a replacement for Swift, how to get all of the payment providers onto ILP, and how to use XRP as the on-demand liquidity. So we have to look no further than the leadership team at Ripple to decide, will Ripple work with Swift, or will Swift and Ripple be competing? The answer is absolutely clear. Ripple is competing with Swift, and they're not going after the messaging system, Johnny. There is another quote from Brad Garlinghouse during the Singapore event when he was asked about the XRPL replacing Swift. Not only did he say, I believe XRP can take up 14% of Swift settlements, that's $700 billion daily by the year 2030. He also said, we're not going after the messaging, we are going after the liquidity. That to me speaks volumes, and it says they're not here to onboard new clients, they're here to improve the existing systems today. If you guys agree, smash that like button. If you disagree, leave a comment in chat. Johnny Krypto, what's your initial reaction to Swift CIO attacking XRP on LinkedIn this morning?
Well, I like the fact that he kind of brought it around at the end and tried to explain it better. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. They're competitors. And so I think first he kind of backsmacked them a little bit like a competitor would in that first response there. But I want to get to what I find more pertinently interesting is he's not wrong in the aspect where banks do need to feel comfortable with the settlement asset that they're going to do. And while XRP may, they don't control it, like they said, not on their balance sheet, could be something that to them they feel risky. But the RLUSD is where I think it brings it all back together again. Because when you think about that, as he rightfully stated, that is more in line with what banks are going to feel comfortable with, some kind of tokenized and an asset backed by the US dollar. That's why I thought Ripple was genius when they created the RULSD. And then people are going to say, well, yeah, but Johnny, what's that do for XRP? Well, remember, XRP can be facilitated as part of the process within RLUSD. So the reality is, for me, I'm looking for any growth or any adoption that Ripple can get. And if it's through the RLUSD coin, that's ultimately going to bring value to the XRP ledger, and ultimately what runs on the ledger, XRP. So you want to see just growth coming in. It doesn't worry me, so much if they don't use XRP per se for the online liquidity. I think that will come later, Abs, and it may not necessarily come in the form of banks, but maybe it comes in institutions that are willing once it happens. So to me, this is an evolution, and this is a massive, what I've said all the time, they are almost competing with the banks in a sense, because they're bringing a new asset to provide liquidity versus the dollar, right? That they control and own. So it's a very, very different thing. And I think it's going to take time to get there.
But it's not just Swift settlements that are concerned about the developments for Ripple and XRP, as just last week, 42 banks came together to block Ripple from receiving a U.S. banking license. And the BPI represents 42 major U.S. banks, which filed objections to Ripple's banking license application. The members include JP Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and several other American powerhouses. But what's the entire purpose of this conversation, Johnny? My belief is that Brad Garlinghouse, Stuart Alderati, David Schwartz, Chris Larson, all of these top executives at Ripple, they understand that Ripple is in the process of going after the largest pool of capital on the planet. Mm-hmm. And in order to win that journey, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but the narrative that people really need to understand is that Swift is not working with Ripple. Having been in this market for 6.5 years, going on 7 years in January, Johnny, one thing is clear. The connections between Swift and Ripple have always existed. But when you think about where this market is headed, it is going to be reliant on blockchains. Companies like Ripple don't need Swift, but companies like Swift will need a product like Ripple. And I believe that Brad Garlinghouse is going to leverage that relationship here towards the back end of 2025. This is what Brad had to say, making no mistake about it. Ripple is competing with Swift.
Markets like Japan, I think, are still unlocking. The market opportunity here is massive. You have trillions of dollars flowing cross-border globally. It's still largely dominated by the Swift network, if you will. And that's architecture. That's a technology architecture that was developed 50 years ago. There's an opportunity to modernize. That takes time, particularly when you have a government in the U.S. kind of combating that innovation. But that's changing now. The Trump effect, if you will, is profound. You're seeing that in asset prices, but you're also going to see that in the adoption of these technologies.
Yeah, and I think, so when you're looking at the growth story then of Ripple, does it still come from overseas, or are you expecting a change in terms of domestic interest in Ripple?
Well, we're definitely already seeing a change in the domestic interest. These 6 weeks after President Trump was elected, we signed more deals in the United States than we had in the previous 6 months.
And that's a mic drop statement right there, Johnny Krypto. But here's the reality. We're focused on the United States, but Swift is a global settlement system. And as countries like China and Japan and the UAE and South America onboard digital assets, it's going to be companies like Ripple that benefit off of that growth. If you guys are enjoying this conversation, smash that like button. And Johnny, the last piece of data that I would throw your direction in regards to this is that when you think about the adversity that we've had to overcome, the storm is in the review mirror. Lawsuit against the SEC, adversity inside the United States, anti-crypto campaign that started with Gary Gensler attacking the currency that we are talking about today. It's a different time for digital assets. And I believe that after the Clarity Act, at the end of 2025, United States banks are going to have full disclosure about how to use these digital assets, which ones are centralized, which ones are decentralized, and which ones are working with the largest payment providers on the planet. Floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, first of all, you have to understand this. You say this all the time, but it's in reverse this time. You say, if you're going to come after the king, you better not miss. Well, the bottom line is Ripple went after the king. They are going after the big pool of money. That means they're going up against all those banks, dude, they're going up against the whole entire banking system. Swift is enriched, or the way I look at it is they're part of that system, right? They've been ingrained in it. They developed, these guys right here, they worked with them for years, right? So that they're buddies. And then all of a sudden Ripple's come along and go, hey, we want to play. And they're like, no, get out, and that's the battle that they're fighting right now uphill. And they've thrown everything at them. Right hooks, left uppercuts, over tops, under, even low blows. But the lawsuit was probably the lowest blow you could throw at them. And yet, here they are still standing. So at some point, you look at it and you say, at some point, they're going to be like, okay, we've tried everything. We can't kill these guys. How do we work together? And that's what I'm waiting for. And to me, the banking license is going to be key. Keep an eye on that and see how that progresses. Because right now, the names you mentioned, those are very powerful names in the banking industry. If they're going to need to win some of them over to start getting this to move in their fashion. Like we know Bank of America, is willing, has mentioned many times working with Ripple, right? You want to see more of that. Plus, remember, at the end of the day, Ripple, I think from the days of when this first started out, this concept of cross-border payment solution 2017 versus where Ripple is today, you got to say Ripple has morphed. They've learned who their enemies are and how this uphill battle is. So what have they done? They've gone and made relationships that they know they can work. They're working with, we know South Korea, big supporter of them. Chinese just invested in them. Japanese investing $2 billion in them. And now we know they're looking at tokenization assets. They bought Hidden Roads. They're figuring out, okay, if you guys don't want to play with our technology, that's fine. We'll go and demonstrate it and buy other things where our technology can play and win. And what's going to happen? Here's what's going to happen. Other companies are going to see, like how Hidden Roads now has a competitive advantage, that they can now move money at a much faster, cheaper settlement rate. And they're like, well, I want that. And then boom, and then it starts to become contagious and you start to see it grow. I know, I'm in the technology space. I know how this stuff works, right? You have to get a few what we call champions out there for you. And then they do all the work for you. And I think that's where we're headed, my friends. So,
well, Johnny Krypto, what do we know? Ripple is in the process of creating the next Apple, the next Amazon, the next Nike, or even the next Microsoft. If you're enjoying this content, smash that like button and subscribe. This is what former CFTC chairman Chris Giancarlo had to say. Over the next 3 years, almost every transaction will move on chain. Here it is.
I predict to you now, within 5 years, virtually most of the money moving around the world, most of the dollars moving around the world will be moving on tokenized digital networks. And within 10 years, I predict to you that there won't be a securities offering, a debt offering, an equities offering of any significance that's not tokenized on chain. And those securities offerings that remain in analog state will be like those bearer bonds and DTC's vault, the coupon clipping bonds that don't matter anymore.
So, Johnny, what I think is so important about that is, what did I just state? Swift needs a product like Ripple. Ripple doesn't need a product like Swift. Given a long enough period of time, companies are naturally going to move to cheaper, faster, better products. That's something you say on the show almost every single day. Ripple does exactly what Swift does and more, offering instant settlement cross-border. And there's a lot of adversity when it comes to being an XRP investor today. Bitcoin maximalists, Ethereum maximalists, Solana maximalists, people are still struggling to conceptualize real-world use cases inside the crypto space. And this is Jack Mallers talking about how Ripple and the XRP Ledger were coins minted out of nowhere. Johnny, we're going to break that down next. Floor is yours.
You know how we have on the show all the time, everybody's talking about utility. When's it coming? We're here. Some people think we're here. Some people think it's later. And I've always kind of told you my thoughts. Well, guess what? Now you finally just heard it from Giancarlo. He literally said, in 5 years, a good chunk of everything will be running. And in 10 years, everything. There's your utility. He literally just told you. And what have I been screaming, right? Normally it takes 10 to 14 years, although I think we're already in the process, right? We've already started it. And it looks like we're about 5 to 10 years away. I've been saying by 2030, a good chunk of it. And then by 2035, forget it, full blown. And there you go. So you actually got it now from not just me, but other people in the profession that can see when we'll have full blown utility. Now, what's exciting about that is over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see growth in this space like you've never seen before. And if you think that Ripple has pegged all their hope or their growth on just cross-border payment solution, you're not paying attention. even if they don't win this battle with the banks, I'm not that worried about it because I believe they have seen that themselves and already as a senior management team said, hey, let's play some other bets. And we've seen it. I mean, they bought Henry Rhodes, right? They're gonna do their own solution. They're an AMA. They've bought Settlement, Mataka, right? So they're going to be playing in tokenization. They're going to be playing in so many different spaces apps that, for me, I don't want people to get hung up or get worried when they see this battle and all these things attacking Ripple. You need to look at it and say, well, that's okay. Where else can they play? And that's what they're doing. And that's why a smart management team matters. You want to invest not only sometimes in the token, but you want to invest in the leadership. And to me, there's no better leadership team out there than the Ripple team. That's my 8 cents.
There's not a better leadership team, and there's not a team that's doing more when it comes to working with central banks and working with the United States government. If you guys are excited about the future of XRP, show us some love, smash that like button, and you're going to want to stick around until the end of the episode, as we are going to be covering our XRP price projections using this analysis from Jake Claver, who's explaining the market cap multiplier for the XRP token. So that's going to be a really exciting portion of the episode. But I wanted to start off with this video right here. This is Jack Mallers criticizing the XLM token while praising Tether. We're going to let this video play and break it down. Here it is.
I'll tell you guys this. I was going to have a partnership with MoneyGram. Strike was going to have a partnership with MoneyGram for cross-border payments, for like really exciting stuff. And they said some shitcoin has us under an exclusive agreement where we can't actually partner with you for a few more years. So there are shitcoins that print tokens in their basement, pay Justin Bieber to tell everyone they're awesome, sell those shit coins to retailers that are unassuming, and then take those dollars and spend them on private deals, marketing, and partnerships. Crazy. So I think this stuff's just going to take time, but I think it's awesome that Tether, they're Bitcoiners. These are my co-founders, guys. Like, I know them well. These guys are Bitcoiners. And for that, I think as a Bitcoiner, I'm very grateful that the most successful company in the world right now is run by Bitcoiners. And they're technologists. I think it's great. I think it's going to take time. I don't think it matters that much today, but we'll see.
So Johnny Krypto, what I find so ironic about this clip is he's criticizing a project like Stellar or Ripple for minting tokens, offering them in the public, and figuring out how to source public value from that. But he's advocating for Tether, which is an unaudited stablecoin provider located outside the United States that has said several times they're unwilling to comply with the audits that are necessary to be regulated inside the US. I think that really exposes the playbook. What's your reaction here?
You want to know why? Let's face it. Whenever Bitcoin price went up, guess what was minted before that? Yeah, you were muted, so people that hear what you said, Tether. Basically, what he won't tell you is the way this whole scam was running for a while was they would pump more Tether. Because remember, Tether's like fiat. It's unlimited. So they would just continue to pump and print more Tether. And now it's literally like a liquidity injection. It's like the Fed printing money. It's like, oh, well, now we got all this Tether. What are we doing? Oh, we're going to go buy Bitcoin with it and drive the price up. Of course he loves Tether. Absolutely.
The reason I played the clip, Johnny, is because think about it. This is somebody who's very successful, working, developing a real company on Wall Street centered around Bitcoin. And he still has a hard time conceptualizing real world use cases for a product like Stellar or Ripple. And in this particular example, he's criticizing Stellar's partnership with MoneyGram because they were unable to build a relationship there. But I think the point is even better. We're earlier than we think because some of the smartest players in the market haven't figured out what the Good Evening Crypto community knows. Utility's on the horizon, and this market's about to dramatically change.
Well, this goes back to what I said earlier when you were talking about Breedlove, Greenlove, whatever that guy's name is, where they just don't want to let go. He's definitely not Breedlove because he don't breed no love. So maybe it is Greenlove. But anyway, point being is these guys just cannot. That's the problem with this maximalism, maximalist theory, right? Is they can't open their brain. They cannot let go of the concept or fact that Bitcoin it had the right idea of trying to free money and being completely decentralized. Okay, I'm not going to say it didn't. I like that concept. Every human, if you're for freedom, you would love the concept of not having controlled money, right, Abs? But the reality is it's so slow and unscalable that it is never going to be a cross-border payment solution. It's going to have to ride on a layer 2 or layer 3 for that to happen. Well, in that case, why wouldn't you just use something like Ripple that's already designed to do that? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
and I think the use cases for Bitcoin have evolved. Like originally, what was the message of Bitcoin? It was get out of the banking system, purchase some Bitcoin.
correct.
Now the message from modern investors is that the biggest players are about to adopt Bitcoin. So it's a complete 180 from what we saw just a couple of years ago. And what really enabled that conversation to change? The ETFs, a shared incentive from Wall Street and Bitcoin investors. That is what the altcoin community is about to go through towards the back end of this year. The second that Wall Street companies can make money off the developments on the XRP Ledger and the onboarding of new products and new clients onto the Ledger, they are going to be our biggest advocates, and they are going to be responsible for bringing the next 10, 15, 25, 50 million Americans into this digital asset class. If you guys agree, smash that like button. And believe me, we are earlier than we even understand. And before we get into the XRP market multiplier, trust me, you guys are going to want to stick around for that. We're going to play this follow-up video where Jack is explaining none of these ecosystems are better than Bitcoin.
To say that Ethereum is going to flip Bitcoin and be bigger than that is the most brain dead, dog shit, dumb thing. You can't say that with a straight face. You have to be like deeply incentivized by some other effort. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And what I've said again is, let's say Ethereum. So Ethereum's not trying to be money. We all know that. It's a supercomputer. It's a stablecoin power upper. It's an NFT, whatever the fuck. But you know, what these smart contract people don't understand is like money's the biggest problem in the world, the $500 trillion problem. We fix money, we fix more than half the world's problems. Let's say Ethereum is going to be as big as Apple, which by the way, that's like what Steve Jobs created is one of the most defiant companies in modern history. Apple Computer has changed the world half a dozen times over. Linux, operating systems, computing, the iPhone, the App Store. Do you guys understand that without Apple, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these products wouldn't exist?
So, Johnny, whether he realizes it or not, he's actually making a great case for altcoin ecosystems like Hedera, like Ethereum, or like a Ripple and XRP. And I think the analogy is perfect. The iPhone enabled all of these applications like a Facebook, an Amazon, or a Twitter, for example, to thrive and to grow. Well, what does the Clarity Act do? It onboards real-world businesses into blockchain products. It tells these companies how you can use XRP, how you can use Ethereum, how you can use the USDC stablecoin to improve the business that you're doing today. We aren't reinventing the wheel, we're improving the car. And I think that's the biggest difference between what Jack is explaining when he's telling everybody Bitcoin's the only one that's going to go after these money markets. I disagree with that. I think that some of these digital assets like an XRP will be used as a better exchange of value. But I also think that there's a whole nother side to this, which is what we started off the episode with. There's only a couple of projects, Chainlink, XRP, Cardano, Ondo, HBAR, a couple of others that are really working with the banks and that are really working with the United States government. And so if these modern settlement systems are about to go through this once in a lifetime upgrade, we are the conspiracy theorists that are about to be proven correct. And that's what I think Jack is undervaluing here. If you guys agree with that, smash that like button. Let me know some of your thoughts under the video. Johnny, what's your reaction here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jack is just, listen, Jack's trying to start a company. He's trying to start a Bitcoin company, right? He's got the company Strike. And so, you know, lending program there. And of course, I'm not going to criticize Jack for what his thoughts are. I mean, he's in that business, and that's why he wants to be successful. And he knows, just like Breedlove, Greenlove, whatever the guy's name is, that these altcoins are potentially taken away from them, and they don't like it. They just don't like it because it's competition. That's the bottom line, and that's why you're seeing the animosity, because, you know, they keep calling it shit coins, and they call us artards, and all these name calling. Versus, give me a good argument of why the Ripple technology isn't good. Tell me how Bitcoin is better. Tell me the use cases where Ripple is going for that it can't solve any of those, and tell me why they can't do it cheaper and better. And tell me how Bitcoin does. They won't. They can't. It doesn't. They won't have that argument because it's a losing battle for them. So the only real battle is, well, you're going to throw you can just label you as a shitcoin or an artard, and then that's it. They don't have to worry about you, right? That's it. And that's kind of, listen, this is no different. Like when we always talk about the adoption and evolution of technology, there's 4 stages. First they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, and then they join you. Well, these guys are at that same point. Right now, they're kind of in the then they laugh at you or fight you stage. They don't like us. They laugh. They think we're a joke. They call us names. They're fighting us along the way. They are not ready to join us yet. There will come a point in time when they will realize when big institutions and governments get behind the technology you talked about, Cardano, HBAR, Algo, XRP, Stellar. There's so many good technology apps. When big companies start adopting them, the governments back them, then you're going to see their tune change a bit. But not until then. For then, they're going to continue. And that's okay.
And Johnny, at that point, the people who are listening to this show are too late. And that's why I want you to understand where we are in this market cycle today. If you are a newer crypto investor, the most important thing you have to understand is this market is driven by cycles. We go into an overvalued market and we go into an undervalued market. And that is what we're going to break down for the next portion of this episode. If you're enjoying this content, smash that like button and let us know, what is your 2025 peak price projection for XRP? Because during this segment of today's episode, we're going to talk about some of those dramatically high price targets. Jake does a very good and simple explanation of how the XRP market multiplier works. And Johnny, the premise is very simple. Anybody can understand this. Not all XRP is in circulation. So we have to start the conversation with how much XRP is really for sale. And that's where we're going to go today, guys. We're also going to cover this XRP price chart that goes to show if we hold $2.65, this may get very, very exciting, potentially reaching a double-digit XRP before the end of 2025. But here's Jake Klaver explaining the XRP market cap multiplier and why this is important to every XRP investor holding this digital asset.
I keep hearing about this XRP multiplier. How true is that? And do you have an example? So here's the piece on that. People look at total supply of XRP, when in reality, the supply demand dynamic is going to be on the available supply of XRP. So that's the multiplier that you're getting. There might be 2 billion XRP left on exchanges, probably less than that. If you included retail and what they're going to exit or sell, if we saw a $10, $20, $50, $100 XRP, you'd see some retail liquidate positions for sure. Maybe you get another billion float on to the exchanges if we see those types of numbers, in addition to what's available on the exchanges. Retail doesn't hold more than, maybe 1.2 to 2 billion total XRP, in my personal opinion. Digital Wealth Partners currently has about, 200 million of that under management. So effectively, by my calculations, about an eighth of retail's XRP currently sits with Digital Wealth Partners. So beyond that's the reason there's a multiplier effect. So if you only had, let's say it's 2 billion out of 100 billion, you'd be that 50x that like Zach Rector talks about. It's total supply versus available supply. And that's why you get that shift in how much liquidity moving in is going to cause, the market cap to rise in a multiplier effect versus if it was distributed across the total supply available, or the total supply versus just the supply available.
And Johnny, we saw a great example of this back during November of 2024 when the market cap for XRP increased $100 billion in just under 26 trading days. Now, why is that relevant? Because $100 billion didn't come into the project XRP. And the on-chain data tells us it was right around $80 billion, maybe $100 billion in total wealth that moved into this asset. I think that is pennies on the dollar in comparison to what's going to come into XRP when these ETFs are approved. We've seen some analysts predict $5 billion in the first 4 weeks. We heard JP Morgan say 4 to 8 billion in the first year. We heard Sal Gilberti say he predicts $20 billion plus in the first year of XRP's ETFs being live. So just based on those inflows alone, forget everything else and just focus on the 5 billion. If $5 billion came into the project for XRP, we are looking at well over, and I'll say this again, well over a $200 billion increase in market cap. That means if XRP is 180 billion, 5 billion in new inflows comes into the project, we're going to see a market cap north of $400 billion. And these are the lowest projections and the lowest numbers I can give. If I wanted to have some real fun here, I would tell you guys that at a minimum, we're going to 20 to 30 bucks. But I don't want to provide that amount of hopium in such a short time frame. So instead, I'll stay with what the data tells me. The most reserved data I can provide says at least 220 billion in a market cap increase just based on $5 billion worth of inflows. Johnny Krypto, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, Jake's not wrong. It comes down to, when you look at the order books, what's available. And of course, as we go up in price, remember, there are going to be sellers, and there's going to be that battle up and down. And I also, one of the things I try to caution everybody about, Abs, is the $8 billion that everybody talks about. It's not coming all in one day. It's going to come in over a matter of time. And so that means it's going to eat away at the order book. So it's not a 1-to-1 ratio just to say, oh, 8 billion, 100x minus 8. But to me, the point is, it still is going to be a massive amount of money coming into the marketplace. And so you're going to see orders come. Now, the real question is, will you continue to get buyers at those higher prices? And that's what we need to see. Because again, if it all came in one shot, yeah, but it's not going to. It's not going to work that way. It's going to come in chunks along the way, because the people who are buying it, that are going to be buying it for this, they're not going to want to be buying it at a maximum price either. These institutions that are going to be selling these ETFs. In fact, don't be surprised if they're already starting to buy some in preparation for it to have available. So to me, I look at it as there will be a multiplier factor. It will drive the price up. And I think that anywhere from high single digits to mid to low double digits is very possible, by the end of the year. Especially, we keep hearing October-ish is when we have the due dates for all these ETFs to come to fruition. If they come through, I mean, we saw Bitcoin doubled in price. Now, so it's not inconceivable that we start to see a massive rise in XRP due to all that extra volume that comes driving into the space. But I like your caution. We don't want to put hope in on this channel, right? We're trying to be realistic here. And I think that's why people watch the show, because we tell you what we really think. Abs, if I start to see high single digits or double digits, I am going to be taking exit. I have a profit plan, and I will be executing on some of it. And, because at the end of the day, none of us know how high it's going to go, and we don't know how low it's going to pull back as we go through the natural market cycles of highs and lows. So to me, it's just be ready, have an exit plan, be ready, Abs, because here's the biggest thing. Most people aren't thinking about how they're going to exit. They're only thinking about, oh my God, it's going to happen. Well, what are you going to do when it happens? You better have a plan where you're going to panic and you're going to do what everybody else is going to be. You're going to be a rubbernecker. You're going to watch it go up and go all the way down. Don't be a rubbernecker. Be ready for when this influx comes in, because Jake isn't wrong. There's only a certain amount that's available, Abs, versus the coin totals. And when those get sucked up, you will see the price go up pretty quick.
Well, guys, the conversation for today was, is Ripple in the process of replacing Swift, or will Ripple end up partnering with Swift? My belief is the evidence is clear. Ripple is in the process of competing with Swift, but this is an update that's a little bit different, Johnny. And let's not forget, March 20th, 2025, the Watcher Guru account was reportedly hacked, and they put out this message. Swift is nearing an agreement with Ripple to use XRP for cross-border payments, with billions of XRP secured in escrow as liquidity for the reserves. If you believe this is happening, show us some love, smash that like button, leave a comment underneath the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.